I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at Gold Derby, here with Laura Karpman, composer on Ms. Marvel. Laura, TV and film composers are experts at evoking emotion, whether that be anticipation, excitement, tension, melancholy, devastation. How do you typically know what the right melody, cue, or theme is to employ when you want to get really emotional?
That's the craft of it, isn't it?
That's the crux.
That's the craft. I mean, it just depends, and it depends on sort of what you're working on and with whom you're working. Everybody has such a wide array of tastes when it comes to this. It's funny because not involving Ms. Marvel, but I'm doing another project right now, and I was talking to one of the producers on it, and I said, I think that theme is dark, and she said, oh, we don't hear it that way. So it's really interesting that people perceive things so differently. But I think when you're working in the MCU, there are certain things, and not always, but I think in my experience, which at this point is now three projects, there's certain things that you want to hit. You know, you want to have a theme for a superhero that feels mysterious, uplifting, heroic. That and the interesting thing about writing in the MCU and about what you kind of go through to is that you test run these themes, right? So that you'll write the theme and it you know, Ms. Marvel, da 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 da, you know, it's very presentational, very out there, but that theme also then has to be mysterious, and then that theme has to be rendered in, you know, with these incredible regional instruments, and then that theme has to, you know, has to become work in an attack in an action sequence. So you have to find something that hits all the buttons of what the paces of what you're going to have to put that theme through. And so with the MCU, it's kind of finding that one kernel that will always be recognized and associated with that particular character, and then literally putting it through these different genres of what they may encounter during the course of their sort of heroic lives in the MCU, and making sure that it can work for every single one of those. And that's what Marvel Suites are about.
Yeah, I think it would be challenging because you've got to strike that balance between vaguely recognizable suite of music that we're expecting, but you want to give us something fresh and unexpected and mysterious, as you say, to set it apart. I mean, you've done MCU before, and so that's fascinating to me. And also, of course, as you say, this is so subjective. How I interpret your music is going to be different to how that person interprets your music. So
that's right.
I don't know how you do it. Thank God I'm not an artist. I just write about it, but that's it. That's your job, and I'm glad that you're doing it so beautifully. So let's do a bit of a deep dive, because the score is very rich. It's full of like these ancient anthemic elements, and it's really ambitious, diverse. But most of all, honestly, Laura, it's very listenable. Like, I actually listen to this on my headphones in noise cancelling bliss. And that's a big deal, I think, for a composer. It's a work in its own right. How do you feel about people actually taking it in without actually even having to watch the show?
Well, I love that. I mean, I think something that I really strive for is to always have a kind of musical integrity in all of my music, no matter what the genre, so that the music can be successful on its own, but obviously also serve the picture. And frankly, Robert, sometimes it's the hardest thing to do, because when you have a lot of people giving you notes and you're having to make changes, sometimes it's easier to kind of say, oh, I'm just going to take this out, and oh, this will get the cue approved. It's harder to say, okay, I'm going to look at this again and still kind of keep its I mean, I'll just say it again, it's musical integrity intact, but that's really, really important to me. So I'm glad that you noticed that in terms of your listening. And that's, listen, we all want, we want to serve the picture. We want to serve the needs of our clients. And that's why we're doing this. And we're massive collaborators and filmmakers, but yeah, we want you to hear the music. So thank you. Thank you.
So the elephant in the room, obviously, is the Indian, Pakistani, South Asian elements. What a highlight. Obviously, before I had even seen the show, before I had heard the score up, that's what I was hoping for. But you never know, you could have taken it in a whole other direction, but you didn't. Talk us through some of the instruments that you employed, because I am always listening for them to figure out what they are. But in this instance, it kind of eluded me because it's not really my wheelhouse. So,
Right,
yeah, talk me
right.
through it.
Well, it's in this case, it wasn't it. Let me steer your question a slightly different direction. It wasn't really about employing instruments, it was about collaborating with musicians.
Right.
So there were a lot of musical sounds that I knew. I mean, I had worked on several, never kind of Northern Indian, Pakistani, but I'd worked on several Indian projects. I had some people that I loved to work with. One singer in particular, Ganavia Doraiswamy, who's just a wonderful uh, Carnatic singer who also does jazz, and she's just a really cool, interesting artist, and she's dear to me. And then she brought along some other people, Rasika Shankar, who's a beautiful Bansuri flute player, and then Sana Amanat, who's the showrunner, suggested the music of Raginder. She played some of his stuff for me. Who's the great violinist. He plays a classical violin, but he's a Pakistani artist, and it's like he's got something that's just so fabulous. And so I said, well, let's bring him into the score. So we had this kind of, and plus a lot of percussionists and different people. So we had a lot of instrumentalists doing their thing, playing my themes, sending back stuff that they did. I had other singers. I put together a fantastic session here in LA with all South Asian artists. We did a really, really great choir session. I consider them my collaborators. And they all just, because look, I'm a queer Jewish girl. I'm not I'm not a South Asian artist, but I have good ears and I'm a wonderful collaborator. I love other kinds of music, and my charge in this particular thing was to work with Sana and work with Charmine, who's the director, and Adil and Bilal, the directors of 1 and 6, and really come up with something that gave Kamala Khan the dignity of the MCU, the dignity of a superhero theme, but also acknowledging her deep and significant heritage and how it really related to the story.
Yeah. There's some tracks in particular that I just really gravitate towards, and I'm not sure if you know all the tracks names off by heart, but I'll explain some of them. Like Mysterious Parcel features these long string notes with pensive piano elements. It's ethereal and beautiful, and then you bring in I think it's a snare drum, and these unusual sounds join the chorus, and then you've got this synth element in there, like a futuristic Daft Punk piece. There's so much to unpack there. Like, what inspires you to throw us curveballs like that?
Well, I mean, the thing about the synth stuff too is you've got to remember she's a high school student.
True.
So there are all these bouncy synths, which, we really introduced in episode 1, and they really are kind of the sound of her youth, but that's what I'm saying is she's a complicated character, right? She's a teenage girl from New Jersey, right? She's from Jersey City. She's a superhero, like maybe a mutant or God knows what. And she's also, has this heritage that's really important, and a bangle that's sent to her by her grandmother that has been a part of the family, for, one would assume, for centuries. And does it have the power, or does it bring out the power in her? And, and those are the metaphors we're dealing with. Like, she has to connect. Oh, there's my dog's barking. There you go. She has to connect with her own inner power before she can, create hard light and do the things that she does. So it's a metaphor of sorts. And so all of those things are part of who she is. And it's like all of us have different parts to us, right? You know, I
Yeah.
describe myself as a queer Jewish girl, you know? I mean, I grew up here, I did this, I did, you know, and so we all have these parts. And if you're going to paint them musically, like if I were to paint my life musically, if I were to write myself a superhero theme, it would be different from Kamala's, right? It would reflect, you know, aspects of my culture or what I listened to growing up or what it was. So that you have to create a world in which these characters exist musically. And for her it was more complicated than, you know, than others, because of who she is and where she comes from, and really needing to make that alive in the story and make it alive musically. But
Yeah.
she is all those things, and those were discussions that we had constantly, with Sana. Just like, and Sana is, you know, in many ways, Ms. Marvel is based on her life, so she lived it. You know, she's a brown girl from New Jersey. Maybe she's a superhero. I don't know. She certainly is in terms of creating this character. But those are the things we thought about.
And that's what multi-dimensional characters are supposed to be. A
Yeah,
Sicilian Aussie guy. I'm not playing a violin
right.
in the outback. Like, I have other dimensions, and so do other characters, right?
That's right.
So it's
That's right.
interesting. It's
And if you
interesting.
became a superhero, then you want to think about kind of what that means. And I do think you know, I've thought about this a lot, and I started really thinking about it on Lovecraft Country with Misha Green, and about, there was one episode in particular where they were, our three main characters were doing kind of a Raiders of the Lost Ark thing, and she said, I want this to be, you know, like Raiders of the Lost Ark with these particular characters. So then what does that sound like? How do you draw from various genres that are really familiar, and that give an audience an instant connection, you know? And then how do you create something new? And in this case, it was as you really marvelously noted, in this case it was a combination of all of these things that become the persona for Kamala, the musical persona for Kamala.
Yeah. There's a track called Bad Things Happen that ends with this banger trance EDM Martin Garrix, David Guetta hook. And typically for me, because that's my wheelhouse, I just
Oh,
loved it. And there's smatterings of it throughout. Are you a
yes.
fan of EDM generally?
Oh my God, I should say I am, but I'm not. But you know what I am a fan of? Messing around with SHIT in the studio. That's what I'm a huge fan of. And so like, and also I think one of the things that happened in the score is that we would take kind of analog synths, and then we would also orchestrate with them. So
Yes.
you've got this combination of these kind of bouncy, very simple synths, like they're sine waves. You know, there's nothing like super complicated. But when you take something like that and then you double it with instruments from the orchestra or singing, then you start to come up with what I think is a unique sound.
Yeah, you do. And it's typical for this score that you have a lot of synth beats. In fact, a lot of the synths I think you use percussively, which I really always love. And
Yeah.
then you punctuate them with string melodies over the top, like Good News, Bad News, Bonding. So when you go full Marvel, you still have this softer edge. And I'm just wondering, you know, how do you get the balance right between orchestral and electronic elements? And how do you know how far to turn that dial?
I think that it really depends. In this particular case, it depends on kind of where you are and what you're leaning into. Are you leaning into the high school story? Are you leaning into her relationship with Bruno? Are you leaning into her crush on Kamran? You know, are you leaning into that part of the story? Are you leaning into her relationship with the clandestines? That's a whole nother thing. Are you, you know, when you get to partition, um then you're dealing more with the heritage stuff, and you're kind of dealing with a kind of an orchestral classicism with the South Asian elements. So just think about having kind of a soup that you continue to modify depending on the location or the story intent. And that's what it is. So in the first episode, and throughout the episodes, but when you're dealing with a high school story, you've got more of the EDM sound, you know, laced with orchestral elements, but probably lighter. Some of those orchestral elements are orchestrated, then when you start to introduce, faux, like the clandestines, then, I mean, that's one of my favorite themes, is the it just grows and grows and grows and grows. And then you've got that, which starts from, a South Asian instrument doing this ba 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 da ba 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 da. It's almost like a loop. It is a loop. In fact, we took an improvised solo there and actually created a loop out of it. So this is the thing, is a lot of the time I think about organic instruments electronically and electronic instruments organically, so that there's always this interplay, again, orchestrating electronic instruments and then looping organic instruments, so that you have that kind of feeling of EDM, or that kind of feeling of, of contemporary music for a young person, but then adding in all the, the crazy orchestra stuff.
You know what that does to the audience, by the way? Just my feedback is it allows me to get lost in it, because then I stop analyzing. I'm analyzing it because I want to talk to you about it. Then I get lost in it. I don't even know what you're doing, but it's feeling, and that's what music is supposed to do. Love it. Final question. So, do you have a go-to instrument or like style when you're trying to ramp up tension? Because tension, usually you have a rhythmic underscore, and then you highlight it with string elements, and that's usually what gets us all excited. How do you find that you like to ramp up tension in a show? Or again, does it just really just depend on the genre?
What a great question. And it's got me thinking. I think what I try to do, it's actually really, really a great question, but for like really deep reasons. And I'm going to give you a more technical reason than you probably even want.
Yeah.
There are certain things that happen a lot, and they happen a lot in temp scores, where you have like rhythmic strings or certain kinds of percussion or things that are very typically used in these action sequences. So it's always like, you don't want to deny that. You know what I mean? If you deny that, then in a way you're denying the genre, but you also don't want to like rely on something that everybody has heard 500,000 times, right?
That's right.
So that's what I mean. So if you take the clandestines theme, right, which I love, and it's this like, that starts getting, and it's really like one long push to the end, but that starts again with that loop that becomes the rhythm, and every time you hear that, that becomes the key. So you've got the repetitive strings that you're used to hearing, for building up tension. You've got percussion that you're used to hearing, that builds up tension. But you've got two things that are different, which is this kind of long throw that is constantly growing and not just repeating. And you've got this instrument which has been looped.
Wow.
So anyway, that's like a long and maybe not the answer to your question.
No, it is. I'm glad that there's an intention behind that, ringing us out by keeping it going. And it's like, when are you going to let up? And you don't, because we're watching it as well. And then suddenly it all just releases. And that's, again, what a good score does. Laura, I could literally keep you here all day, but I won't.
But you're so kind.
On beautiful work, and thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much.